Hello, everybody. It's Ed Rosenberg again, and this afternoon I have the privilege of speaking to Mark Daust from Quiet Light Brokerage. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Ed.
Okay, I actually got your contact a while ago, and I checked out your website, and I'm always intrigued about this business of selling businesses, selling Amazon accounts. So first of all, tell me a little bit how you got involved in selling businesses.
I got involved about 10 years ago. My background was in the web hosting space. I worked for a company right out of college called Alabanza Corporation. They had the first cPanel before cPanel. Everybody knows cPanel. Alabanza was the first company to really have that. And I quickly learned how volatile the internet world is. I ended up getting let go of that from that position and started my life as a professional entrepreneur. And just a few years after I started that journey, I sold my first web-based business through another brokerage firm. And that kind of opened my eyes to the idea that, hey, you can actually build something online and sell it. There are people out there that want to buy these assets. And it wasn't more than a year after I sold my first business that one of my clients from my web hosting days wanted to sell his web hosting company. And so I helped him do that. And that was really how we started Quiet Light Brokerage, was with that first sale. There weren't a lot of people doing it at the time. There was only a handful of companies selling online businesses. And so, I'd love to say that there was years of formal training, but a lot of it was learning and picking up on the existing players in the traditional brick and mortar world and building from there and applying those principles to the online world, which has been pretty successful for us.
Right. So now I was told that a standard business, and I don't know if there is such a thing as a standard business, not even an online business, but a standard business, it's 7 years of profit is the estimate. So if a company is making 300 grand a year, it would be seven times that if you want to the value of it. Now I don't know if that's true or not, but how would you say on an online and particularly an Amazon business, is that way less?
It would be less than that. And you have to be careful when you hear people throwing around multiples, because you have to take a look at what the industry is, what's the niche that they're in, what time were they talking about? Back around 2000 to 2005, multiples were crazy, ridiculously high. So you could get, 10 to 15 times revenue, not even profits, for an online business pretty easily. We actually wrote an article on this recently about major historical events that have impacted the multiples on online businesses. But to give people just kind of the distilled version for an online business, and again, you really do have to ask what type of online business. But for an online business, when I first started 10 years ago, 4 to 5 years worth of profits was pretty standard. When we hit the Great Recession, where we had all the bank failures and everything else, it was really tough to get more than 2.5 years worth of profits for any business. Now, most businesses are going to be between 2.5 to 3.5, depending on the type of business that you're in and what you're selling. SaaS companies, for example, tend to get better multiples than Amazon businesses. Amazon is going to be really between the 2.5 and 3 for the most part. And we're talking about the heart of a bell curve. I'm sure your viewers can imagine, there's some variance in this, and if you were to plot all this out, you would have a pretty nice looking bell curve. So the heart of the bell curve is going to be in that 2.5 to 3, and it's been there for a while. It's kind of stayed in that range for a while.
What would you say in an Amazon business is the value of the Amazon account? Now, we'll put aside the terms of service question of how this can be done without violating terms. But if I have an account, say it has hazmat, platinum, daily disbursements, Laurel, and a lot of big brands, subcategory approvals, like the dream Amazon account, what would you say just the account is worth?
Well, there's going to be a lot of factors we're going to look at. We're going to look at the history. We're going to look at all those factors. The way I like to break it down for people is any business, and Amazon falls under this large umbrella. Any business needs to be looked at in terms of its risk profile and its growth profile. These are the two most fundamental things that drive acquisitions and drive a price. And this isn't rocket science. You think about anything that you buy or any investment you personally make, you want to get money back, right? And you're going to sit there and think, what's the riskiness of this acquisition or this investment? And what's my potential for payout? And so when you're describing that dream account, that dream Amazon account, what you're doing is you're describing something that has some protection from competition, especially if you're selling in protected categories, and also the opportunities. So you're really helping out. Now, for an account like that, you're going to be pushing up above that 3 multiple, maybe 3.2, maybe 3.3. But again, I don't want to tie people to those numbers, because when we look at a valuation and do a thorough valuation, I'm going to ask somebody upwards of 100, 120 questions about their business in written format, and not talking about just the phone call, in written format, just to be able to get a sense for what that multiple really should be. It's a fairly exhaustive process. But generally speaking, if you've got that dream Amazon account, you're going to do pretty well. It's going to be above 3 for that multiple, assuming everything else is solid.
Would you say for Amazon accounts, there are more people buying or more people selling?
There's always been more buyers than sellers as long as I've been in this business, by a pretty heavy margin. To give your viewers just a little bit of context, when we put a listing up, so a new business up for sale, we get on average within the first 3 days between 70 and 100 inquiries about that business for sale from people that are looking to buy. So there's always been more people buying businesses than selling. And this really, it speaks to the heart of business ownership, right? It's better to own a business for the long term than it is to sell a business, financially speaking. I think, it's, people think that I should be out here saying, well, look how much money you can get from selling your business. You can, but if you hang on to a business for 5, 6, 7 years, you're going to make more money. This is why so many people are interested in buying. They're seeing these assets, they're seeing them grow. They see them as potentially great return on investments. If the assets themselves have value, so they hold a lot of value for people for the long term. So buyers have always traditionally been more popular than sellers. And if it flips, it'll be bad if it flips.
Right. But I understand. But then when you sell your business, you're only paying capital gains tax. Is that correct?
Depending on how your business is structured and how the deal is structured, but yes, for the most part, you're paying capital gains.
Well, which is much less. Okay, what should an owner focus on most if they are thinking of selling in 1 or 2 years?
The biggest mistake people make, and it's not the fanciest thing to talk about, but the biggest mistake people make is their documentation and their financial statements. People come all the time to us with documentation and financial records that are frankly a mess. It's not good enough to have financial records that work for you, right? As a business owner, I do it too. As a business owner, you don't need pristine financials all the time. It's good to have, but you don't necessarily need that. You just want to see how your business is doing. But when somebody's looking at your business, not as an owner, but as an investment, and something that they're going to invest 6, 7 figures, 8 figures into acquiring your business, you bet they're going to look at those financials very, very closely. So the number one mistake we see people make is just lack of documentation within your company. Your standard operating procedures, do you have them set? Do you have your business diagrammed? Some basic things like that. 1 to 2 years out, what I recommend to people to do all the time is get a valuation done by a broker, or there are professional valuation companies out there, but by somebody who really understands what buyers are going to look for, or maybe even a friend who has bought businesses before, and ask them to do a really thorough valuation of your business. What's wrong with this business? What would you balk at if you were to look at buying this business? And the reason I say do that 1 to 2 years out is some of the changes that you need to make in order to position your company needs to have history before people are going to accept it as an acceptable change, right? So for example, if you wanted to increase your cash flow and your earnings to get a higher valuation, and you thought, I can do all the customer support myself. I don't need to have this customer support person. I'm going to let them go, save that money, or maybe reassign them to another company I own, whatever the case may be. You need to show that that works for the long term and put that history on the books. You can't just tell a buyer, you don't really need that person, so we should really value the company higher. Well, yeah, you say you don't need them, but you never made that choice to go without them. Prove it, put it on the books. So some of these changes take 12, 14, 16 months to really put on the books.
Right. So if someone is thinking of buying an Amazon business, what should they figure out before they start looking to buy?
Uh, know what you want. I mean, this is part of the biggest mistake I see people buying make all the time. They come to us and they say, "I'm looking for a business to buy. I think I want it to be online." I say, "Great. What type?" And then they, "Well, I don't really know. I kind of like this, kind of like that." And even if you know that you want Amazon, know what you're looking for. What are your strengths? Are you really good at sourcing product? Are you really good at private label? Are you really good at negotiating contracts? Are you really good at the operations and fulfillment standpoint? These are things you need to identify and do a self-assessment. What do you want to do on a day-to-day basis? And then once you have that profile, I actually recommend people keep a checklist, and it's going to be a running checklist of things that you need a prospective company to have in order to buy it. And then you have to have patience. Deal flow is slow. It's a competitive marketplace. The best businesses go under offer within a couple of days usually. That's why I say have a checklist so that you can evaluate these businesses quickly. But if you know what you want in advance, you know what you're looking for, you can look at a lot of deals. You can look at a lot of the deal flow and rule out the bad ones without putting in tons of time into conference calls and everything else. But you really have to know in advance what you want and constantly be updating that. Maybe you want a certain thing in a business, but you've looked at 20 businesses, you haven't found it. It might be that your expectation there is unrealistic and you have to adjust accordingly.
Is there a significant increase in valuation for private label Amazon businesses?
There is an increase in valuation, absolutely. So the hierarchy that I would go personally, and this could change, who knows with time. But the way I look at it right now, drop ship would be a bottom rung of the ladder. Wholesaling moving up. If you got protected categories or protected contracts, that's going to help. But you have to look at the duration of those contracts to see how long those are protected. Private label is going to be towards that top of that list. Again, private label is not immune to competition. You can have lookalike products flood the market as well, but it certainly does help to not have the exact same product being sold by 100 different sellers. So private label is kind of the gold standard that we look for.
Right. There's been a recent surge in Amazon businesses for sale. Why is that?
Good question. I think there's a lot of factors. I wrote an article on this about a year ago, and we really started seeing this growth in Amazon businesses for sale. I think part of it is just the maturity of the Amazon program, right? It's been around for a long time, but if you take a look at when it really started to take off, it started to take off about 4 or 5 years ago. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially online entrepreneurs, we run our businesses for 3 to 5 years and then we sell them. So I think part of it is just a natural change. I think another thing that's happened is a lot of people started their businesses off of Amazon, and then they added Amazon as a side revenue channel. And then all of a sudden, Amazon became the revenue channel. And some of them abandoned their regular shopping carts. Others just kind of give it lip service. And others have a nice diversified revenue source, but there's still that Amazon component. I looked at last year's sales. I haven't looked at this year's sales or companies that we've sold. But last year in 2016, over 70% of the e-commerce businesses that we sold were either entirely on Amazon or at least had an Amazon component. And that's just a product of more and more people understanding there's revenue to be made there. I should at least have a presence there, if nothing else. So it's going to be a part of any acquisition in the online world, really, if you're doing e-commerce.
Would you say there's a lot of value in like what software and processes a company has in place, or do buyers generally revamp that? What I mean is, if you're shipping out $50 million, there are processes involved in researching products and sending it to FBA. Some companies I speak to have it down. They know every penny where it is, and everything is smooth. And other companies, they have like tons of employees and it's chaos. Do people evaluate the processes as a valuable equity in the company?
Absolutely. So before I said the two main drivers of value to look at would be the risk profile and the growth prospects of a business. I actually usually boil it down to four categories. I just want to simplify it even more. So I say risk, growth, transferability, and documentation. The transferability portion would be how easy is it for somebody to come in and run that business. And if your processes are really clean, pristine, and don't require 150 employees to run, yeah, that's going to be a much more sellable business than a place that has a warehouse, 150 employees, and processes are an absolute mess. Who wants to go into that? The people that are going to be interested in that second scenario are people who are operation specialists, and they're going to ask for a discount on that business. So they're going to expect a discount because they're going to go in and they're going to modify and change the processes to make them efficient so that the company can be more profitable. So there's still opportunity. You can still sell both businesses, but the previous one that's really, really well done, has great software in place, is going to be worth more. Absolutely.
What common mistakes do buyers make post-sale when evaluating an Amazon store?
The mistakes that they make post-sale, the seeds of those mistakes start before the sale, right? And so the really, I'll tell you a personal story. It's kind of an embarrassing story because I'm supposed to be an expert in this stuff, but a few years ago, I bought an e-commerce business for myself. It was an absolute disaster. I blew through all sorts of red flags that I shouldn't have blown by because I thought I knew better. And the biggest mistake I made in that acquisition is I didn't have a good plan for after I acquired the business, and I didn't really know or understand what I was getting myself into. So the biggest mistake buyers make is they ignore the advice, they ignore the framework that the seller gives them. Now we have an opposite case study. We have a podcast coming out pretty soon here where we talked to one of our clients. He just bought an Amazon business from us, and the seller laid out what he would do to grow the business over the next 6 months. Well, this buyer did that. And he planned in advance how he was going to do it, but he did it. He executed the plan, and the business has grown 300% in 6 months. Now, that's a success story. That's what we like to see. The problem is when you come in and you think the seller doesn't know what they're doing, a little bit of hubris, and then you just kind of throw that away and do your own thing. Those are the people that tend to fall flat in their faces.
I'm curious, how does it work by an Amazon business? So the money's paid when you sell it, the money's paid up front and then they do the transfer, or first they transfer and once everything is smooth, then they make payment. Like, how does that work? Because there's always that issue, like you're selling the business, even though if you don't change the name on Amazon, there's always that nervousness that the handover may not go so smooth.
Sure. Transfers are obviously the sticky point, and it's difficult. Most transfers are going to use an escrow service of some sort. So the buyer is going to put that money up so that it's out of their control with an escrow service, and then we'll get the assets transferred over into the buyer's name completely. And once that's all confirmed and good to go, then those funds get released to the seller. Deal structures can vary depending on the individual deal and the comfort of the buyer and the seller. I've had buyers that are totally comfortable with just paying money and transferring the business after. And I've had buyers that want to have 1,000 checks and balances in place because they're not comfortable with that. So a lot depends on the individual, but I'd say 85 to 90% of our deals are done through an escrow service.
Right. A lot of people, I'm sure, when they come to you about Amazon businesses, they say, well, I can just do it myself. I can start a new account. I can order from China the same product. I know that's not true because there's so many hurdles just to get to that point where they already are. But what would you say to someone like that?
I've been hearing that objection from buyers since I started Quiet Light Brokerage 10 years ago. Why don't I just do this on my own? The nature of online businesses is it usually appears as if there is almost no barrier to entry, and sometimes there isn't. And if that's the case, and if you want to sell your business, you have to ask yourself, what is the barrier to entry? If there is none, don't sell, because frankly, you don't have anything that can be sold if there are really no barriers to entry. But for the most part, what are we actually selling when we sell a business? We're selling the goodwill. We're selling the systems. We're selling those little things that you learn along the way that make this successful. The buy versus build question is a good question. People that have the money to buy businesses need to make that determination. Do I want to risk on building on my own? Maybe I'll be successful, maybe I won't. If you're not successful, you get nothing back. At least when you buy a business, you know what it's done historically. You know that you should be getting some of that money back from it. So I think it's a valid thing for buyers to be looking for. But if they want to discount what a seller has built and the goodwill that they built, that's almost always a mistake.
Right, and then you also get in the inventory, pretty much at a discount when you buy it. So that alone may be worth it, right?
But the relationships, especially with an e-commerce business, relationships, especially vendor relationships, I mean, those are some of the most valuable things. And this is why wholesaling companies on Amazon aren't worth as much, right? If you're just wholesaling and anybody can wholesale the exact same item, well, then that question starts to carry a bit more weight. The only real advantage that you have is better customer feedback, but that can be generated over time.
Right. Okay. Really appreciate it. And I'll have all your contact info. This is really fascinating. I think you're going to get a lot of requests from this video.
Well, that'd be great. We love to do valuations for people. We don't charge anything for them. It's really just that sort of check in. What would I have to do if? I already said, for the most part, if you have a good Amazon business that's making money, keep it. I think it's better to keep it for the long term. But if you're thinking about selling in the next couple of years, understand the objections that you're going to get now, because it takes a couple of years, at least a year, to really iron those out.
Yeah, that was very informative, and I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
We will. Bye.